it's Trisha, the Inky Planner. Welcome back to my channel. I am sitting down with my beautiful Archer and Olive bullet journal and I'm ready to plan out my week. It is March 11th. So I'm going to use this gorgeous stamp set. This is a layering stamp set from Altenew called Beautiful Day, but I'm just going to use the outline image only for both the floral and the leaf here. I'm not going to use the layering stamps, and I'm going to color them in myself with some watercolor pencils. So to get started, I'm going to create a mask, and I'm using Post-it notes for this. I prefer to use full stick Post-it notes, but I didn't have any. So if you're going to use regular Post-it notes, just make sure that you stamp close enough to the edge so that you have some of that sticky behind your image. So I'm going to just fussy cut this out. Make sure that you stay really close to your lines, if not even a little inside of your lines so that you don't get any halos. And once you have that all cut out, then I can get started with my regular stamping here. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink because once that dries, it's permanent and I can watercolor over it, which I intend to do today. So I don't know if you can see, I've got the grid for my weekly calendar just very lightly laid out in the background, so it gives me an idea of where I want to stamp. Put down my first image. You do have to give it just a second for this ink to dry. It is a pigment ink, so it does take a second. And then I'll carefully put the mask on top and re-ink my stamp so that I can create a second floral image right behind this first one. And I'm rotating the flower also just so they look like they're a little bit different. And then that cluster of leaves from the same stamp set, I'm going to use and tuck that behind that first flower. So I'm leaving the mask in place, and then I will move the mask down to that lower flower, and I'll do another set of leaves behind that. Rotating that same leaf cluster again and just kind of reorienting it. So now I have this beautiful image down here in the corner that I can color in, and I'm going to add one more leaf cluster up in the upper left to balance that out. I considered doing additional ones, but I decided against it. So today I'm going to use my Inktense pencils. These pencils are beautiful, and on this paper they just blend beautifully. So I'm grabbing two colors for the flower, carmine pink and cadmium orange, and I'm going to sort of create this two-tone petal with pink at the base of the petal and cadmium orange up at the tip. And then I just have a tissue and my aquash water brush, and I'm now back to normal speed on the video so you can see this in real time. And if you haven't worked with these, first of all, let me say I'm not a fine artist. I've never been trained in this. This is just something I play with for fun, and this is technique that I have developed, and I like the results that I get. This may not be, the professional way to do this, but I get pretty good results and I'm pretty happy with it. So you can see the way I do it and find out if that works for you. But I'm putting a very, very light pressure here. I do not scrub my pencil onto the paper because I don't want to create like grooves in the paper. I just want to use light pressure, apply a little bit of ink, and I'm kind of putting that pink color at the bottom of the petal and my yellowish orange color at the tip of the petal. And I'm going to repeat that for each individual petal as I work my way around the flower. So I'm using very light pressure. You can see that my pencils aren't very sharp either. Again, I don't want to like stab the paper and create little grooves. I'm just kind of working in a soft motion to put a little color down. And you can experiment with if you want to leave white space in between them and create a little gap. I didn't really on most of the petals. But then when you put that water on and activate it, the color just becomes so smooth and blended, especially on this beautiful paper. And it creates a really pretty gradient between those two tones. So I'll let you watch a couple more petals as I work my way around. And I am also paying attention to the folds and curls of these petals. So you can see on the first two that I did, the petals sort of curl around on themselves, and you're seeing the back side of the petal. And for now, I am just leaving those, and then once I get the flower filled in a little more, I can decide how I think those will look best. I also should mention that I have the tissue there. If I feel like I have too much water coming out of my brush, I can dab it off, or if I feel like I'm collecting too much of the pink color and I don't want it to overrun that yellow as I'm working my way up, I'll just dab it off to clean off the brush and then go back to the paper. So I keep that handy so I can control my flow of water and so that I'm not over blending the colors. I do want to preserve that yellowish orange color at the tip of the petal. So now I'm working on this larger petal down below and just blending out. You can see on this one really well because it's a little bit more space how smooth it makes that color when you add the water to it. It just sort of glides across the surface of the paper. And I'm keeping this first application nice and light. I can always come back, and you'll see that I do, come back after with a second round of color to add a little bit more dimension and drama to the petals in the places where the shadows would be. So for right now, I'm just kind of getting down a first layer of color. And I will just repeat this all the way around the flower, blending each one out and getting this beautiful gradation between the pink and the yellow. So you don't have to watch me repeat this process for every single petal. It's all the same. And at the end of it, this is what I have in my first layers. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here for you. Sorry for the wobbling of the camera as I zoom, but it steadies back out in a second. But now I'm going to go in with another layer to sort of deepen up those shadows and create a little bit more dimension. So I'm using the same carmine pink, but just another layer of it to make it a little darker. And I'm not going in hard, I'm just adding another layer, putting a little bit more in between these stamen and in the pit of the flower. And you'll see I end up doing a couple layers in here, even with different colors, to really get the depth that I'm going for. But you don't want to rush it. You want to kind of take it one step at a time. So in the areas where it feels like one petal is behind another petal, or where there's a little bit of a deeper curve in the petal, I want to add a little bit more color to make it look like it's tucked back in there. So you can see I'm kind of repeating that. Now I've gone back to double speed here, so you can see my pencils moving a little faster. Sorry, I crept off screen, but I'll come back into frame here. But I'm adding a little bit more depth into each of these petals. And remember that when it dries, it does dry a little bit softer than when you initially lay the color down. It'll kind of soften up as it dries. But I think it's important to just take this one layer at a time and not try to get to this intensity right away. Just put a little bit down, see how it looks, come back and put a little more down, and see where you feel like you need parts of the flower to feel like they are further back or deeper, and then parts to come forward. So put a little bit more depth where you want them to be recessed back behind other petals. So you can see this like second layer of petals behind the first one. When I put that color in, the petal in front of it sort of jumps forward at you. And it only takes a little bit down in the pits. And this is all still working with that carmine pink, the original color that I used. It's just when you put the second layer down, you get to build up a little bit more of that depth. Now, I did feel that some of the yellow areas needed some shadowing too, but I didn't want to use the pink to add shadow there, so I grabbed another color, this mid vermilion, and I am putting that where the petals curl up upon themselves in some places because there would be little shadows behind that. And you can see I'm rotating my paper because sometimes it's more comfortable for me to come at it with my brush from a certain direction. So I just make the paper work for me, rotate it around until I'm comfortable. And I'm trying to create little shadows even on the tips of the petals where they tend to curl on themselves and where there might be a little dimension. Now I'm back to the pink because I felt like I needed some in this petal that's all curled up. And then at some point here, I want to just take a little color directly from the tip of the pencil. So you can do that with these Inktense pencils. Just touching my wet brush to the tip of the pencil, getting a little bit of color on there, and I'm adding just a little curve to the back side of the petals on some of these. It's very subtle, but it just puts a little bit of shadow there and makes it look like they're rounded in some spots. So I'm grabbing a brown pencil now. I believe this is called Madder Brown because I'm feeling like I want some dark right in the center. And then I had a couple areas where I'm going to fill in with the carmine pink again as well. And then I'll get ready to move on to the leaves. And I flip my paper over. It's always so impressive to me that this paper does not have any bleed through or shadowing on the back side, even with these multiple layers of watercolor. So for the leaves, I'm using a couple shades of green. I always feel like if you vary the shades, you get a lot more just interest and dimension. So this first color is called Fern. It's a real light green. You can see I'm putting it on with a super light hand, just sort of feathering it on there. And then yes, you can see I'm showing you it's Fern. And then I pull out my swatch sheet. I always like to do this whenever I get a set of paints or pencils or anything. I just like to have a reference sheet to see what they all look like. And I end up picking a color that you didn't even see there, but it's called Beach Green. And I'm using that kind of at the base and up the centers of these leaves just to add another color. And you'll see I'll introduce a third color later. But just getting a little color and interest and dimension going on. And when I blend those, you see a little bit of both of those colors coming in. You can see how that fern, as soon as you put the water on it, it sort of pops to life with that bright green. So I'm just touching the water to that. And as I said, on this paper, it's so beautiful how it just glides, the color just sort of glides together. I'm putting a touch of brown in for the stem. And then I'm going to go back to that beach green, use that tip touching technique, and just put a little bit more depth in at the base of these and where they fall behind the petals of the flower. I'm going to let that dry for a minute, and I may come back in and just add another layer of shading in there in a second. So I'm just backing up here so you can kind of get an overall look at how our flowers are turning out. And now I'm going to go to work on that bottom flower and just use the exact same process that I did for the top one. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward, jump ahead here so that you can see how it looks when this is all done, because I don't do anything different on this second flower. So I've jumped ahead, I've completed that second flower, and now here is where I do add some additional shading. So that second flower is behind, kind of underneath the first one. So there will be even more dramatic shadowing happening under this flower. And I'm introducing some deeper colors to try to achieve that look. So I have Shiraz, which is a kind of a dark wineish red, as the name would suggest. And I'm just tapping in some of that color, and you'll see it takes me a little while to build this up. So I use that color, I use that mid vermilion color, and then I even grab that madder brown, and I'm going to build up that shadow that falls onto the second flower because the first one is in front of it. So I'll just play a little music while you watch me work that in. So I think I'm pretty happy with the flowers, and I'm going to go back in and just add that last little bit of dimension and color into the leaves, and I'm introducing a third color here called Oak, which is a much more earthy brownish green, and I think it just kind of tones the brightness back a little bit, and again adds just a little depth to those leaves. And I repeated the exact same coloring process for the second cluster of leaves down there, and then I will backing up here a little bit so you can see the whole page, and then I'll repeat the same thing, same exact coloring process up here in the corner with the fern, the beach green, and oak, and then introducing a little bit of that madder brown into the stems. Again, I'm using a really light hand, just sort of laying a little soft layer of color down. And then I take my water brush to blend it all together and then introduce a little bit more shadow and depth with that third color. These pencils just make the process really easy, and like I said, I have no training in this. I'm not an artist, but I do feel like it makes you look like, you get a lot of character into your work with these beautiful pencils. So now I have to actually put in the grid for my week. And as I mentioned, this was sort of sketched out in the background. I love it when my focal point elements overlap my grid. So I like to have that sort of laid out lightly in pencil in the background, and then I can decide where I can put my focal point elements, and I make sure that I do it in a place where I'm not going to take up too much real estate in my calendar, so that I don't have room to actually write my events and my to-do lists. And I usually like to do that on Saturday and Sunday because those are typically lighter days. So I put it over on that right side pretty often. But you can see up in the upper left, I've got my little sprig of leaves that overlaps that first box, and that will just be my to-do list for the week. And then on the right-hand side, I've got a lot of overlap on the last two columns, and those are my Saturday and Sunday columns. So I'm not worried about covering up a fair amount of that. And then I will make a box down below my columns, and I'll use that for future planning, like things I know I need to do in the following week, looking ahead. So that's the basic layout for this week at a glance. I'll go through and erase my pencil lines underneath. And then to add the days of the week across the top, this page had such an elegant feel to it that I grabbed this sophisticated script stamp set, which is a script alpha, and it's intended that you can string these letters together and sort of fake some hand lettering. But I thought it would be pretty just to use each individual letter across the top for the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday headers to each of my columns. So I'm just going to go across and stamp those, and I don't mind if they dip into the column just a tiny bit there like that T does. I think these letters are just beautiful, and I think the feel of them, like I said, matches the style of my page because it's a real elegant, beautiful flower. And of course, this is where I make a gigantic mistake. And I always like to leave the mistakes in my videos because all of us crafters are human, and we all have to figure out how to salvage. Like, after all that coloring I did, I am certainly not going to ditch this page. So when I go to add right here this little tail on the end of my S, you can see I completely botched it, and I made ink fingerprints in multiple places. You can only see one, but I actually did this in multiple places. Not to worry, I grabbed my Tombow Mono sand eraser, which if you don't have one of these babies in your stash, it is a lifesaver for times like this, because you can gently rub across the page and sand off some of that ink, especially pigment ink, because it sits on top, the first layer of the paper. And you just very gently and patiently rub it around. And here my fingers were covered. I kept on getting more and more smudges. I was yelling at myself during this process. But I just took my time and sanded away those smudges the best I could. And then you can see on these fine lines up by the S, I'm just using a white gel pen and tapping it a little bit. And really, at the end of the day, would you ever even know it's there? If I had not pointed this out and you just saw the photo, you probably wouldn't know it's there. So these are the little tricks of the trade, right? I think we've all been there. So on to finishing touches. I have this metallic silver jelly roll pen, and I'm just going to touch that to the little tips of these stamen on the inside of the flowers. It just brings them to life a little bit, adds a little highlight on each one. You can see I'm not totally covering up the whole black image. I'm just adding a little dot of highlight. And I'll pull it up and catch the light on there so you can see how that shines. It's really pretty. And after doing that, I kind of felt like I wanted the centers of those flowers to be dark. So I'm having a little trouble getting it flowing, but I'm using a black Sakura glaze pen, and I'm kind of wiping it with a tissue there to get the ink going a little better. And I'm just coloring in the centers. I decided I wanted those centers to be real nice and dark. And that, I believe, is the finishing touch, other than I'm just going to write in my headers for those extra boxes. You know, I have, like I said, the column on the left I use for tasks for this week, and then the little box down on the bottom I use for tasks for next week. So I'll just write that in real quick, and that will finish off my page. And I had so much fun working on this. I always love coloring in big blooms like this. I feel like it's really like therapeutic, and a nice way to spend an hour on a Saturday afternoon. So here's a look at my finished page, and I have some still shots for you here at the end. I hope you enjoyed this Plan With Me video. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more like this. I tried to walk you through some of the coloring. If you want to see me to leave in the full coloring on future videos, I can. Just comment below and let me know your preference. But hopefully you enjoyed this and had some fun, maybe got inspired to try this out in your own journals. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.